Hello, my fellow fallen, my phenomenal fairies, my beasts of burden, my shit shovelers, my life lovers. Hi, how are you doing? Of course you're doing beautifully because, well, of course you are. And if not, well, you should be because you deserve it. I'm going to finally, from front to back, start to finish, read this book. A woman used to live down the road from my dad when he was little, and this is a story about my grandfather and his land. And she wrote it and dedicated it for all who believe. The name of the book is At Twilight, and the author is L.L. Alexandria. So, Lena eagerly turned the calendar page and was delighted to see that it was finally December. Although there was snow on the ground and the temperatures had dropped, she knew that it would still be days, if not weeks, before Old Man Hudson would call and say the pond was frozen and she could go ice skating. Growing up in the country with many neighbors but few friends, hearing that the pond was frozen was the highlight of her winter. It would mean that she could skate from after school until twilight, alone with her thoughts and her dreams. The days passed slowly, and finally the phone rang. Tired from a long day of sewing beautiful clothing for other people, Lena's mother feigned politeness when she answered the phone. Lena eagerly heard one side of the conversation. Lena only heard one side of the conversation, but she knew that the pond was solidly frozen, and that when her mother said, "That's good to know. Thank you, Mr. Hudson." I'm fumbling over my words, maybe because I don't have my glasses on. Sorry. My spectacles, my readers. She tried not to bother her mother, but the look of anticipation on Lena's face made her mother admit that the pond was ready. Old Man Hudson had shoveled away the snow, and she could start ice skating tomorrow. The next day at school seemed to last forever. Normally an attentive student, Lena could not concentrate during class, and even recess seemed intolerable. When finally she was on the bus headed home, she could barely contain her excitement. Her mother was still working, but Lena knew the drill. As long as Old Man Hudson had confirmed the pond was frozen, she could skate until the sun began to set. When the sky became indigo, no matter how much she wanted to stay, she must head home for dinner, homework, and bed. It was a long walk to the pond, but it only helped to build Lena's enthusiasm. Clad in thermal underwear, woolen socks, 2 turtlenecks, a puffy coat, knitted scarf, earmuffs, and mittens, she walked down the dirt road and crossed through the woods where the Hudson home was nestled amidst the trees. Lights were on, but Mr. Hudson, a widower, was nowhere to be seen. As she climbed a short hill and descended onto the other side, Lena observed snowmobile tracks all around her. The paths were fresh, but the evening was still, and not a sound could be heard. Unlike tonight. As she climbed a short hill and descended on the other side, Lena observed snowmobile tracks all around her. The paths were fresh, but the evening was still, and not a sound could be heard. She continued through a berry field until she came to a clearing where a small pond opened before her. Lena sank into a snowbank, took off her boots, and slipped on her white ice skates embellished with red laces. The air was crisp, and her nostrils stuck together as she breathed in the chilly air. The only sound for miles was of falling snowflakes softly hitting the earth. The ice was not smooth. It was, after all, a pond in the woods, shoveled by an old man with arthritis. The uneven surface helped Lena, as it allowed her to gain just enough speed, not enough speed to really hurt herself, since she fell often. Okay, wait a second, let's try that again. The uneven surface helped Lena, as it never allowed her to gain enough speed to really hurt herself, since she fell often. With tentative steps, she slid onto the ice and began to slowly nudge herself along. Although in her mind she was a champion skater who could twirl and spin and jump and glide, Lena could do little more than push herself along with uneven strokes, often favoring one leg over the other. Her spins were mere half circles performed on unsteady legs. Her warm clothing restricted movement, but she felt like a ballerina as her imagination took hold, and she skated and skated and skated. Sorry, I wanted to flip the page for some reason without even finishing it. The sun was beginning to set when Lena noticed a sparkle near the border of the woods. Intrigued, she crossed the pond, slowly making her way toward the twinkling object, expecting nothing more than a trick of the light as the sun's final rays hit the freshly fallen snow. She audibly gasped when she saw a tiny pixie pirouetting on the edge of the pond. Blinking her eyes, she checked to see if anyone else was in the woods. Perhaps a high school boy was playing a trick on her. Lena slowly looked around, barely daring to breathe. She was utterly alone. A fading gleam of sunlight hit the pond and illuminated the falling snow and the icicles on the trees. Lena sensed that she was no longer alone when out of the corner of her eye she caught a glimpse of another fairy twirling on the ice. Scared to move, not certain what she was seeing, Lena stood perfectly still as the dimming light reflected more tiny creatures, no more than 6 inches tall, dancing on the ice, tumbling through the air, and twinkling at the water's rim. They appeared to be laughing and singing, but not a sound did they make. Lena was frozen to the spot as she gazed at these ethereal beings. As big as she was, they didn't seem afraid. "Hello?" she meekly whispered. They looked at her, but never said a word. They seemed to hear, but didn't respond. Lena stared at wonder at their graceful movements and blissful frivolity. Aware of her presence, they kept a watchful distance as they continued to twirl and twinkle. Twilight was their time to shine, but it was her time to leave. Their movements were mesmerizing as the day continued to slip away. She was now cold and hungry, and she knew that she would no longer be allowed to skate on the pond if she didn't go home soon. Never taking her eyes off these tiny curiosities, she made her way to the snowbank that served as a bench and plopped herself down. She pulled off her skates and stepped into her cold boots. Reluctantly, she began her trek home through the berry field and was delighted to see that the wraith-like fairies left the ice and followed her. How exciting. 7:22. They were painfully quiet, but Lena could not resist speaking to them. They accompanied her over the hill and through the woods, never underfoot, but merrily frolicking nearby. Lena happily told them about her day at school, her house, and her mother. She was so engrossed talking to her tiny friends that she never saw the figure watching her. Old Man Hudson stood at the window of his home, gazing through the trees, and noticed Lena carrying on a conversation with herself. The moment she stepped onto the road to head home, her fairy friends hastily disappeared, and nothing Lena could say or do could coax them back into existence. Despite pleading and searching, she was once again completely alone. 808. The moment she stepped onto the road to It was almost dark now. Although tempted to stay and await their return, Lena broke into a run all the way home. Upon entering the house, the smell of soup was strong and welcoming. She hung up her skates, threw off her winter layers, and began shouting to her mother about the great time she had skating on the pond. Tired after a long day at work, her mother admonished her to settle down and come to the table for dinner. Lena's mother always made sure that the home was warm, the food was delicious, and Lena never wanted for clothing or toys. Miss Tomney had been widowed when Lena was quite young. This difficulty compelled the young mother to work hard, pay the bills, and never allow Lena to realize that they were poor. Mealtime was typically rather sullen, but tonight Lena could not contain herself. "Mom, do you believe in fairies?" she asked, breaking crackers into her soup. Not in the mood for a child's imaginative spirit, Mrs. Tomney tersely stated. "Lena, fairies don't exist, and it's time for you to start growing up." "But, Mom, if I saw them, then they exist." Mrs. Tomney looked up from her meal. "And what do you think you saw, Lena?" Her mother's voice was unyielding. Silliness was not tolerated, and Lena knew it. Lena now hesitated. Maybe it was a trick of the light, or a mere glimmer of the falling snow. Maybe she had been tired or hungry, or both. "Well," she started, "these tiny dancers floating on the pond looked like fairies, or little angels, or—" Her voice trailed off as she saw her mother's stern look. "Or," her mother completed, "snowflakes and flurries." Silence fell between them as mother and daughter began their nightly struggle between reality and possibility. Maybe, Lena admitted, more for her mother's sake than for her own. The meal concluded in silence. With a sigh, Mrs. Tominey picked up the empty dishes and began clearing the table. Homework, Lena. Thoroughly resigned, Lena walked to the living room, spread her books on the floor, and began her studies. Arithmetic and vocabulary words hardly seemed important anymore. Not another word was spoken that evening. Lena didn't know if her mother was disappointed or just tired. When her homework was finished, she brushed her teeth, ran a comb through her hair, slipped on her flannel pajamas, and headed to bed. Mrs. Tominey came to turn out the bedroom lights. As she stood in the doorway, the light from the hallway allowed Lena only to see her mother's outline. "Go to sleep, Lena," she said gently. She turned to leave, and Lena heard her mother say, "It's time to put childish fantasies away." Lena pulled the blankets to her chin and snuggled deep into her bed. She lay awake, trying to remember what she saw, or thought she saw, in the woods by the icy pond on a chilly December night. She truly didn't know if what she saw was real or imaginary. She was frequently chastised by her mother for having a vivid imagination, and now Lena didn't know if this was one of her pretend worlds or reality. It all seemed so confusing. As she drifted off to sleep, Lena never heard the knock on the front door. Mrs. Tominey went to answer it and found Old Man Hudson standing on her doorstep. Resigned to the intrusion, she opened the door further and invited him in for a cup of tea. As he took a seat in the kitchen, Mrs. Tominey boiled water and found a mug. She made an aromatic cup of cinnamon tea and then sat down next to her unexpected guest. "I saw Lena return from the pond this evening," Mr. Hudson began. Mrs. Tominey was glad that the neighbors kept an eye on Lena. The comfort of trustworthy neighbors calmed her nerves on the nights that she had to work late. "She does love skating on the pond. Thank you for shoveling it." The conversation was awkward, but Old Man Hudson did not seem to be in any hurry to leave. "Do you remember when you used to skate on the pond, Sherry?" Mrs. Tominey's face broke into a wistful smile as she recalled pleasures of a simpler time. Even when she was a teenager, Old Man Hudson had shoveled the pond so that the neighborhood kids... Old Man Hudson had shoveled the pond so that the neighborhood kids could play hockey. That was a long time ago, she confessed. Tension enveloped the room as Mr. Hudson sipped his tea. When Lena walked home alone through the woods, it looked like she was talking to someone. Mrs. Tominey looked unnerved, brushed away his comment with the terse, "Lena has an active imagination." Old Man Hudson thoughtfully put down his mug. There was a moment of silence before he spoke again. "Don't you remember the fairies?" he asked. "Sorry. I know you saw them all those years ago." At this, Mrs. Tominey stood up and delicately stated that it was getting late. Knowing that he had worn out his welcome, Mr. Hudson slowly put on his hat, grabbed his gloves, and stepped outside. The snow was falling harder now, and the night was completely dark. As he stepped off the front porch, he turned and looked at Sherry. "Just because you stopped believing doesn't mean they stopped existing." Mrs. Tominey stood in the doorway long after Mr. Hudson's figure disappeared into the night. Reality was cold comfort, but it was all she had. One day, Lena would understand. 1321. 1321. I love you. I've been meaning to read that to you for over 9 months now. Well over 9 months. And since then, 4 people in my family's collection of friends and family have passed away. This woman's mother, the woman who wrote this book, her mother is she's surely going to join the other side soon enough. At least that was what my mom told me when she demanded I give the book back. So I made copies. I really wanted to meet her, ask her to sign the book. It brings me to tears. I have a daughter named Luna. I never want any of my children to stop believing in anything. I want them to continue to believe that everything is possible, that this and that are true. $14:44 when I looked at the clock. I love you. Bliss out, bitch. Bliss out, boo. Bliss out, bro. Bliss out, beautiful. Enjoy this now moment. I lied. I can feel you. Just like you can feel the emotion in my voice, I'm sure. I love you so much. I only miss you because I am a sovereign being at the moment. But you know who you are, and we're always together. Good night, my sweet, sweet babies. Bless out.